Okay, I think we're good. Good evening, guys. I am Mrs. Dave the Lawyer, aka Jacqueline Leah, and tonight is Wednesday. I apologize. I planned to be on last night. I wanted to finish up that hearing that we started on Monday night, but I was not feeling well. I came home from some errands and I had a fever, so I took the night off. I do still have where we left off. That hearing was about health insurance and small businesses utilizing direct to carrier to save money. So we'll definitely revisit that. But today there was a really important hearing talking about Homeland Security, identifying fraud in America. James O'Keefe and Nick Shirley are interviewed in this hearing. So I thought that would be a little bit more interesting, and it's happened today, so it's very relevant. So I wanted to get that stream started. I'm going to start it now because I think there's a little bit of a lapse. Hold on one second. Hopefully I won't continue to have tech issues. Hold on one sec. Good. It's just getting started. If you are curious, I'm on my treadmill. I love multitasking, getting my
The
steps
committee will
in.
come to order.
On the treadmill, a couple of nights ago, I got like nearly 14,000 steps in on one of these streams. The average American, I think, walks less than 4,000 steps a day. And our ancestors actually walked anywhere from 14,000 to 18,000 steps per day. So me walking on this treadmill while I'm on the stream, I hope to inspire other people watching to get one of these walking pads or get outside, walk, get your steps in. Walking is like one of the best forms of exercise you can get. I think it's very underrated, but if you want to burn fat at like a high level and, just maintain your strength, longevity, walking is like one of the best things you can do. It also helped me to totally recomposition my body. I've had 3 kids, and I'm in my 40s, so I definitely credit some of this to walking, but we'll get started. Also, if you see me on my phone, it's because I'm in the live chat talking with you guys. I love everybody's opinions, and oh my gosh, you guys are awesome. You have so much good stuff to add in the chat, so keep on chatting. If you want to hear anything else or have any questions, type it in the chat. I'm live here on the chat, ready to talk and interact with you guys, but let's get started. I think this should be a really good hearing.
In my office, I keep a clock that measures our national debt in real time. This morning, that clock stood at nearly $40 trillion. Washington taxes the American people. Washington borrows against our grandchildren's future earnings. Then Washington sends billions of dollars out the door, often without knowing who receives it, if any service was performed, or even if the business exists. The federal government loses hundreds of billions of dollars to fraud every year. And when the money disappears, politicians act surprised. No private business would survive this way. A bank confirms an account exists before wiring the money. A credit card company flags suspicious changes in seconds. An insurance company verifies that the patient exists and the treatment occurred before paying a claim. They verify first because it is their money that's on the line. But when the money belongs to the taxpayer, Washington pays first and asks questions later, if it asks them at all. Our first witness, Nick Shirley, decided to see for himself. In Minneapolis, he visited supposed daycare centers that had collected millions of dollars from taxpayers. He found industrial buildings with blacked out windows, no playgrounds, no children, no employees, no one answering the door. These were not complicated accounting irregularities buried deep inside a federal database. The question was obvious. What exactly are taxpayers paying for? Mr. Shirley found the same warning signs at autism centers, home health companies, and other providers collecting large government reimbursements. In California, he found hospice and healthcare companies stacked into single office complexes, some marked by nothing more than a sheet of printer paper taped to a door. Many couldn't answer the basic questions about their own patients. A private insurer would have stopped payment immediately. The federal government kept writing the checks. Prosecutors have now charged 15 people in Minnesota with schemes involving more than $90 million. One autism services scheme alone, $46.6 million in fraud. The Justice Department calls it the largest Medicaid autism fraud case in its history. Prosecution is necessary, but it comes after the money is gone. The fraudsters have already been paid. The families who needed care have already been cheated. Taxpayers may only recover pennies on the dollar. Government should verify before it pays. Does the provider exist? Are real people performing real work? Are the patients eligible? Were the services necessary? Are the invoices honest? These are not radical demands. It is what hardworking American taxpayers deserve. When government refuses to verify, it does not merely endanger taxpayer dollars, it destroys public confidence in our elections. In California, James O'Keefe revealed a cash for ballots election fraud scheme targeting homeless men and women who were offered cash, cigarettes, and marijuana in exchange for signatures on petitions and voter registration forms. So far, one individual exposed to Mr. O'Keefe's undercover video footage pled guilty to federal charges. Mr. Shirley followed the money. Mr. O'Keefe followed the signatures. Both found the same machine, a system that rewards volume, discourages scrutiny, and depends upon someone in authority looking the other way. In one system, government counts the claims and sends the money without asking who received it or what work was performed. In the other, officials accept registrations without asking who signed them or whether the process was legitimate. Whether Washington is distributing taxpayer dollars or safeguarding the ballot, government processes first and investigates later. Then, years after the damage is done, announces an indictment and expects applause. Fraud is not an ordinary cost of government. It is theft, theft of taxpayers' earnings, theft of needed services, and theft of the legitimate vote. Our witnesses went where government investigators had not gone and asked the questions the bureaucracy refused to ask. I thank them for their relentless commitment to exposing fraud and demanding accountability. The American people deserve better from their government, including Congress, who keeps writing the checks. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Chairman Paul. The government has a responsibility to ensure that taxpayer dollars are used efficiently, effectively, and responsibly. And when there is evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse in taxpayer-funded programs, the government must take action to recover the cost and hold wrongdoers accountable. My time serving in this committee, I've been proud to work across the aisle with many of my colleagues to improve oversight of taxpayer dollars and fight fraud. I worked with Senator Ernst and Senator Hassan to pass bipartisan legislation to prevent conflicts of interest in federal contracts. After learning that a company was being paid with tax dollars to advise the government on oversight of the pharmaceutical industry, while simultaneously being paid by pharma companies to help market their drugs. We passed a bill to end this practice and to make sure that taxpayer dollars are being used in Americans' best interest. I worked with Senator Kennedy to pass a bipartisan bill to improve government data access, which will save millions of taxpayer dollars by preventing improper payments to deceased people. I worked with Senator Carper and Senator McCaskill to block scams that were hurting small businesses by fraudulently selling services to secure government contracts, services that the government already provides to small businesses for free. And when Congress was responding to the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic with significant emergency spending, I worked with Senator Johnson to establish the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. We fought to ensure that there were strong oversight mechanisms, including alongside those resources, because we knew that bad actors would try to take advantage of the situation. To date, the PRAC has supported more than 50 investigative partners in over 1,200 investigations and has identified $2.5 billion in potential fraud that the government is now continuing to try to recover. In fact, the PRAC model has been so successful that Chairman Paul you worked to expand its oversight responsibilities as part of the big, beautiful bill. It is an unfortunate reality that there is always the risk of fraud in government programs, which is why we need strong controls. A strong oversight of government spending to ensure taxpayer dollars are going to help the American people and not the fraudsters. Our federal government had more of these strong oversight mechanisms up until last year, when President Trump fired 19 independent inspector generals in violation of the law. He removed experienced independent investigators with a strong record of identifying waste and fraud and replaced them with cronies. It's hard to overstate the damage that has been done to independent oversight. Many of the watchdogs we count on to identify wrongdoings are now fearful that they will be fired or retaliated against just for doing their job. On top of that, President Trump created DOGE and let inexperienced staffers, led by Elon Musk, make arbitrary cuts across the federal government. DOGE was supposed to save $1 trillion. Instead, their reckless cuts caused chaos and may have actually cost taxpayers more in the long run, as the administration had to rehire workers and reinstate contracts that they canceled. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a report that I released last May.
Without objection.
Thank you. This report, which found that the federal government could have saved taxpayers more than $175 billion by implementing recommendations from the 19 independent inspector generals that President Trump fired unlawfully. Far more money than DOGE ever delivered. President Trump is also proposing a new scheme to control federal grant dollars that will allow him to direct taxpayer dollars to political allies and punish partisan enemies, all while undermining independent oversight. Not only have President Trump's actions created an environment where fraud can thrive, but incredibly, he has also pardoned multiple convicted fraudsters who have combined have committed billions of dollars worth of fraud, pardoned by President Trump. These pardons wiped out an estimated $1.3 billion in restitution and have frequently gone to wealthy and well-connected individuals. It sends a signal that you have money or the president's favor, you can commit fraud without consequence. And finally,
I just find this introduction very troubling, very troubling. And remember, if you're new to this stream, something that I say often, and I want you guys to pay attention to, is it's often a tactic of the left where they'll point their finger and accuse the right of doing the exact thing that they're actually doing. So when they claim, oh, the right is committing fraud because they're doing X, Y, Z, in many cases, the left is actually doing that. They're committing the fraud and they're doing all the things that they're accusing the right of. So I just want you to pay attention to the egregious statements that the left is going to make about Trump, about the Republicans, because like I say, typically, and this is proven true numerous occasions, almost 100% of the time, typically what they are yelling about and what they're accusing the right of doing is what they're actually doing. So please just pay attention to that.
Finally, if we're going to talk about fraud, waste, and abuse, we must also talk about how President Trump has abused his public office to enrich himself and his family, not improve the everyday lives of Americans.
So if you're out there and you have a beer or, some alcohol in front of you, or even, medical marijuana, anytime somebody says or mentions the Trump ballroom, I want you to take a drink, take a hit, okay? Trump ballroom, take a hit, take a drink. Or if they bring up the J6 slush fund that they like to mischaracterize and they call it the January 6th or slush fund, I want you to take a drink, take a hit, okay? I don't know if they're going to say it at all in this hearing, but typically this is what they bring up when they talk about these things. So let's see, let's keep count. Hopefully nobody gets too drunk, okay? Do this at your own discretion. Don't listen to me.
Or protect taxpayer dollars. Since taking office in 2025, President Trump and his family has made an estimated $2 billion from cryptocurrency alone. And if this committee is serious about tackling fraud, I hope we could work together to hold the administration accountable for the ways in which they have undercut independent oversight and fulfill our own role to conduct oversight of the administration's actions that have unquestionably enabled fraud. We need to restore the strong, experienced, and independent watchdogs who have a proven track record of fighting fraud and getting money back for the American people, rather than amplifying sensationalized social media that takes a more focused on getting views than on actually getting the truth. Mr. Chairman, we share the goal of saving taxpayer dollars and making our government more efficient. And when you're ready to bring in federal officials to testify, conduct oversight, and advance additional legislation to crack down on fraud, my colleagues and I are ready to do the work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It is the practice of this committee to swear in witnesses. Will each of you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Our first witness will be Nick Shirley. He is an independent journalist known for his on-the-ground investigations, which he publishes on his social media pages and the Anti-Fraud Club website. Mr. Shirley.
My name is Nick Shirley. I'm a 100% independent journalist who seeks each day to serve we the people of the United States with the mission to show the world the reality of things as they really are. America was built and created by strong men and women who loved America and never would have thought to rob, steal, or cheat from its very own citizens. Unfortunately, today, America's good faith has been abused by others, often foreigners who seek to harm, rob, and cheat America. Through my efforts, I've exposed billions of dollars of fraud and helped save America hundreds of billions for years to come. When we talk about fraud, we are talking about money that is being stolen from hardworking, law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. This issue has nothing to do with political parties. No dollar says Republican or Democrat on it. When a fraudster commits fraud, he or she steals from all of us. Last December, I published a 43-minute-long video exposing widespread fraud in Minnesota. That video became one of the most viewed videos in internet history and gained over 4 billion views in just 7 days across all forms of media. The fraud was so obvious that the fraudsters weren't even trying to hide it. The infamous Quality Leering Center was born, and that video has become one of the most consequential videos in American history by the amount of legislation it has created. Since posting it, over 30 bills have been created and introduced in Congress regarding fraud. A new fraud task force has been created, and the Treasury is working on new systems to stop fraud at unprecedented levels. I helped ignite a war on fraud across the country. People often wonder, how come this fraud became so big and how come it became so rampant? And the reason is because no one actually ever really looked into it. When Elon Musk offered to help by creating Doge, people burned his factories, bombed his cars, and politicians even celebrated his company's stock going down. Elon was right when he said the fraudsters complained the loudest. By exposing the fraud, I actually also exposed the politicians and media who worked for years to cover it up. Governor Tim Walz labeled my work as white supremacy and called me a far-right delusional conspiracy theorist. Meanwhile, he dropped out of re-election, and he even said he has ended his political career. Now, the highest government-funded daycare in Minnesota has pleaded guilty to daycare fraud, and the largest autism bust in American history has been exposed. Where is Tim Walz in the media now? It just so happens that over 80% of the fraud committed in Minnesota is by the Somali population. After Minnesota, I exposed widespread fraud in California within the daycare and hospice community, where an impossible 1/3 of Americans on hospice care were set to die in Los Angeles. The next day, the governor, Gavin Newsom, posted an AI-generated image of myself trying to mock and discredit my work. Only days later, he and his attorney general both tried to take credit for exposing the fraud. Now the attorney general's wife has created a bill that would make it criminal to expose fraud. The Stop Nick Shirley Act, also known as AB 2624, will help fraudsters cover up their crimes and prevent themselves from being exposed, specifically in immigrant communities. Politicians often use immigrant communities to commit fraud. Why would they allow this to happen? In California, Medi-Cal, their Medicaid program has now more than doubled from $108 billion in 2022 to a proposed $222 billion, while enrollment has only rose by less than 1%. The system is filled with bad actors and fraudsters. In New York City, government-funded adult daycares pay for elderly Koreans and Chinese to play ping pong and do Tai Chi at the taxpayer's expense. An impossible number of patients are registered, and those patients receive kickbacks for attending and signing up their friends. Over $2 billion has gone to these fraudsters at the taxpayer's expense. And I'm just one person doing the work of many people. If the government and media is not going to do their job to help America, it's the responsibility of strong men and women, however old they may be, to do it. I am doing it. Despite the threats and burdens that come, it must be done. I'm doing it with the help of everyday Americans that government-paid officials are supposed to do. And the media teams across the country have millions of dollars to do this, yet they don't look into this fraud. They've actually quite literally failed us. If we as Americans do not stand up to protect our country, we will lose our country. Fraud is so rampant in the United States, I could go to all 50 states and uncover millions of dollars of tax dollars being defrauded, wasted, and abused. It is my wish while sitting in front of you guys today that you take action and help Americans by cracking down on all of the fraud, and to simply put Americans first. Thank you.
Our next witness is James O'Keefe.
Wait, I have to chime in because our chat is lit as usual. So there's people in my chat right now basically saying that I am spreading propaganda because I'm streaming this, because they think that Nick Shirley and James O'Keefe are liars, that Nick Shirley is just making this up and this is propaganda, that none of this fraud and none of the actual evidence that he always has and always has receipts and literally has like video of everything he uncovers, that's propaganda, because that's what CNN told them. And maybe this person's from California. I don't know, there was a bill passed in California nicknamed the Stop Nick Shirley Act, and it got passed recently. And basically, they're not concerned that there's actual fraud going on in California. They're concerned that people like Nick Shirley are publicly coming out and exposing the fraud. And that needs to stop. So people will get fined and penalized for pointing out that fraud is going on. Okay, that's what's happening in the great state of California right now. That doesn't seem fishy for people. I don't know, I guess I'm just living in a different universe than some people on this planet, where I don't know if it's like cognitive dissonance or what, but when shown actual evidence in front of them, they just cannot comprehend it. They actually think that that's propaganda, that the real evidence they're seeing in front of them, that's fake and propaganda, that no fraud is actually going on. TDS, Trump bad, Orange Man bad. And that me, for streaming this and exposing this on YouTube, I'm spreading propaganda. Okay. This is just a reminder that the average American has a under 100 IQ. So thank you for these comments, because it's just reminding me that, because sometimes I forget.
He's an American investigative journalist and media entrepreneur. He's the founder of Project Veritas and currently serves as the founder and CEO of O'Keefe Media Group. Mr. O'Keefe.
Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, and members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. In February of 2026, I disguised myself as a homeless person and approached a petition circulator on Skid Row near San Pedro and South 6th Street in downtown LA. I saw cash clipped to his shirt, which I thought was odd. The petition circulator told me, "We're going to need 14 signatures and we're going to pay you $2. One of our reporters, disguised as a heroin addict with track marks on his arm, asked the homeless, "What's going on here?" They all replied with one word: money. We recorded a woman named Brown handing over cash as payment in exchange for a homeless person to register to vote in a federal election. Now that is a federal crime. Congress expressly criminalizes payments to people to register to vote. Why? Because the vote is sacred. It's an act of conscience, of judgment. And when it becomes contaminated by incentives, when it is for sale, It undermines the sanctity and fairness of the process designed to elect those who represent us. Our investigation contributed to a federal criminal prosecution, with U.S. Attorney Bill Asalia saying, "Once I saw these videos, I went to work." Brown described the whole thing as a, quote, pyramid game. And then came the irony. In a neighborhood of NGOs in Los Angeles designed to protect the vulnerable homeless population, the person being confronted by the NGOs was not the fraudster, it was the reporter exposing the fraud. Just minutes after we exposed these felonies, I was approached by a man who identified himself as being with the LAPD, and he began to record me. When I pressed him, he admitted he was actually with the LA Homelessness Authority. Under California law, that's a crime. So this was also a form of fraud, albeit covering up for the fraud happening across the street. But it got worse. We witnessed petition circulators giving marijuana in exchange for signatures on the petitions. And when they spotted our camera, they told one of our reporters, "I'm going to knock your bleeping ass. Don't come over here again. I'm going to beat your ass." He threatened us. So we decided to band together. We formed a Citizen Journalism Justice League featuring Savannah Hernandez, Cam Higbee, Anthony Rubin, and John Tro. And over the next few weeks, we caught dozens of these cash and drug exchanges for signatures on the petitions. Together, over the course of those next few weeks, we released reporting that prompted the governor of California not to attack us, but to say that what we did was important and the activity should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We also found next ballot petitioners asking homeless to sign in other people's names. We recorded over the shoulder one petitioner who took out his phone to access an online database to pull voter rolls and addresses. Quote, "I have an Idaho address," said the voter. The petitioner says, "I'm going to give you an address to write. Your name is Robert." Another says, "I'm giving you a new name." So we visited the residence of those people who were disenfranchised. One of the names was Vicky Walker. The homeowner at that address said for 9 years he received election mail in the name of this Vicky Walker. In fact, he told me he'd received so many ballots in the name of Vicky Walker, he named his cat Vicky Walker. We returned to ask for comment from the petitioner who was offering drugs in exchange for signatures. The same individual who had threatened us earlier, he grabbed the petitions and hid them in his car. When we caught up to him, one of his associates charged at us and punched my producer in the neck. The two men then charged at me. And right before they struck us, Cam Higbee deployed pepper spray. With pepper spray in their eyes, the two men continued to attempt to assail us. My colleague Braden and I had no choice but to run for our lives. To this day, all the fraudsters that committed state crimes roam free. This, as Nick has said, is not a political issue. It's not a partisan issue. It's not a conspiracy theory. And it is most certainly not circumstantial evidence. Everything I've testified to you here, all the quotes and many more, are all recorded on tape. So the question before this committee is not whether the fraud exists or whether it's happening. Oftentimes in politics, y'all debate the facts. The facts are what they are. The question is why the incentives allow it to flourish. There is money in fraud, but there's no money in exposing the fraud. And when laws are ignored without consequences, fraud becomes the incentive. Fraud becomes the model of life. Tony Moore, one of the coordinators for the ballot petitions, told us if there's no consequences, it doesn't matter. And that's the point. I don't have subpoena power. Us journalists don't have the power to do anything but expose. And they campaign in this building about freedom and protecting democracy and preventing disenfranchisement and how nobody is above the law. But if those principles are not enforced, when they're violated in broad daylight, they're not principles at all. They're slogans. And without accountability, our notion of freedom is just an illusion. Thank you.
Senator Peters will introduce our third witness.
Mr. Dylan Hitler-Gadet is the acting Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs at the Project on Government Oversight, commonly known as POGO. Mr. Hitler-Gadet is a nationally recognized expert in a range of good government issues, including government ethics, anti-corruption policy, separation of powers, the rule of law, and government operations integrity and effectiveness. He has testified before Congress on 8 separate occasions on a variety of topics, including preventing waste and fraud, defense spending accountability, judicial ethics, and undue foreign influence. Mr. Hitler-Gadet and POGO have routinely engaged with Congress on bipartisan and pragmatic solutions to address government program integrity and protect taxpayer dollars. Thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate your testimony.
Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Dylan Hetler-Gaudet, and I am the Acting Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs at the Project on Government Oversight. We are a nonpartisan, independent watchdog organization with 45 years of experience in promoting accountability, transparency, and effectiveness in the federal government. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to start with some data to paint a bit of a picture for us. We currently spend about $7 trillion a year in terms of our federal budget. In fiscal year 2025, we ran a $1.8 trillion federal budget deficit. We currently carry a federal debt load of about $40 trillion. And payments on that, interest payments on that debt are the third largest annual expenditure we make each year, the fourth largest of which is our defense budget, which now comes in at a cool $1 trillion. And if President Trump has his way, that number will balloon to a staggering $1.5 trillion this year. Why do I start with this big picture data? It's important to realize that vast sums of taxpayer dollars are at stake when we talk about the issues of waste, fraud, and abuse. It's equally important to remember that the federal government has an equally vast responsibility and an obligation to be the best possible and most responsible caretaker and steward of those taxpayer dollars. We have more data that can tell us a little bit about how well the federal government is delivering on that responsibility. Recently, the Government Accountability Office issued a report in which it estimated that in fiscal year 2025, the federal government issued $186 billion in improper payments, bringing the total of improper payments issued since fiscal year 2003 to $3 trillion or thereabouts. GAO also estimated that in 2024 alone, we lost somewhere between $230 and $520 billion to fraud. Lastly, GAO tells us and projects that if we were to work harder to eradicate duplication, fragmentation, and overlap in federal government programs, we would be able to save $100 billion a year. Now, what does this data tell us? This tells us pretty categorically that we, and in particular the federal government, are not doing a good enough job overseeing and managing the country's precious public resources. And the only way to get there is to promote actionable, common sense, pragmatic reforms, and it is those exact kinds of reforms that I'm here to talk about today. First, we must look to internal watchdogs and oversight practitioners, such as Inspector General, the Government Accountability Office, the Office of Government Ethics, the Office of Special Counsel, and others. And we must strengthen, empower, and fully resource them to perform their essential functions as the taxpayers' eyes and ears from within the federal government. Second, we must also provide safe and secure reporting and disclosure channels for federal whistleblowers. Courageous individuals from within the government often blow the whistle and expose some of the worst waste, fraud, abuse, corruption, and malfeasance, and they are often all too common on the receiving end of reprisal and retaliation for doing so. It is imperative that Congress create these safe and secure disclosure channels while also strengthening protections from retaliation and reprisal for federal whistleblowers. Lastly, the technical architecture that the federal government currently uses to monitor, track, analyze, and assess federal funding is woefully inadequate. Key databases and resources like usaspending.gov and the System for Award Management are in desperate need of overhaul and modernization. Congress should start by dramatically expanding the quality and quantity of the data and information required to be reported and collected up and down the spending chain. Congress should also work to bring parity in data collection and information reporting across program categories and spending types. Lastly, Congress should also hold federal agencies' feet to the fire to comply with existing reporting and disclosure requirements, which agencies are often not doing at all. The upshot here is that waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption are real, and they are pernicious, and we must do something about them. The only way we're going to solve them is by some of the reforms and others that I have laid out here today, but we're not going to solve them by focusing on sensationalistic anecdotes, clout-chasing viral internet videos, or provocative pseudo-documentaries. We're also not going to solve these problems by demonizing and scapegoating specific communities and constituencies based on partisan, political, and ideological agendas. Thank you again for inviting me here to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
We're going to begin a round of questions, and I'm going to defer my time to Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've had in testimony and opening statements a couple jabs, I guess, at Nick Shirley's videos. The only reason that we're taking fraud seriously is because of that independent journalism sitting in front of us. The fact that he exposed in all its gory detail how grotesque and how blatant this fraud is, how rampant it is. So, Mr. Hitler-Gaudet, listen, I agree with most of your prescriptions here. Chairman of the committee, we had you testify. I've been trying to support of Inspector Generals. Now we've had to, got a couple of Inspector Generals resigning ahead of the posse, because they're certainly not perfect as well. The problem I have with all the prescriptions is it hasn't worked. The lowest estimate I hear fraud in the federal government is $250 billion a year. I think you said 230. We had in a subcommittee hearing LexisNexis saying it's $1 trillion. It wasn't really until this administration with DOGE, which is, that effort's also been denigrated here, that we started going in there and actually doing something about it. Now you have Dr. Oz going in, again, I think partly because of Nick Shirley's revelation that a third of the hospice centers in America were in Los Angeles County. So the way we prevented that fraud is we stopped funding 400 of them, and not one of those hospice centers complained. So it's the tip of the iceberg. Mr. Shirley, again, I commend you on your phenomenal journalism. Quite honestly, when I saw that happening, I go, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't my staff do those videos? Journalism is crucial to this. You're a partner in what we need to do. And it's only because of those videos that expose it that we have any chance of trying to rein in this beast. But you mentioned the Stop Nick Shirley Act. What is that? Can you describe that in greater detail?
Yeah, so that's a bill that's been created by Mia Bonta, the wife of the Attorney General of California. And the official title is AB 2624, and it's to make it essentially illegal to expose and to film outside of immigration support service providers. That means any entity that provides services to illegal migrants, whether that be healthcare or legal fees. If I were to go out and film a video in front of one of these locations, perhaps an NGO like Churla that's received over $80 million from the government, and they give me a piece of paper and they say, hey, you cannot publish that video. If that bill passes, it'll be illegal for me to
So it really ought to be renamed the Protect Medicaid Fraudster Act. Would probably be a better description of that, correct?
Correct.
Why do you think you have such pushback from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, from just the denigration here from the ranking member, from Governor Newsom? Why is that? You would think trying to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse would be a completely nonpartisan issue.
Because they quite frankly need the fraud. They actually need the fraud.
Mr. O'Keefe, and I've got a lot more questions, but I'm not understanding. What were these petitions about? You really have they were paying money for signatures on petitions, generally pushed forward by non-governmental organizations, which, by the way, we don't track how much money is expended. Of the $7.5 trillion spent this year, we have no idea how much funnels eventually through NGOs. But so you have paying dollars for signing petitions, and then you also have paying dollars for voter registration. Have you kind of followed that through? What's that all about?
Yes, Senator. One is a California state crime to fraudulently sign in someone else's name to get something on the California ballot initiative, and the other is a federal crime, where there's federal jurisdiction where you pay someone in order to get them to register to vote.
So again, these were petitions to get something, a referendum on the ballot in California.
That's correct.
So what didn't make sense to me about the registrations, they were signing up fake names or fake addresses. I would think, how if you're going to really commit election fraud, you'd sign up legitimate names, legitimate addresses, so that you could basically harvest those ballots and vote for who you wanted to vote. Have you kind of followed that whole?
Yes. In one instance, we looked over the shoulder, and a petitioner logged into a website, something called sigvalid.com, and accessed currently registered voters using their real names and real addresses. We were unable to determine or ascertain what this sigvalid.com is, but we believe that your committee has subpoena power to try to find out what that is.
Well, that'd be my offer. Both Chairman Paul and myself have subpoena power. If you need it, we're more than happy to use it. So I'm making that offer to both Mr. Shirley and to you, Mr. O'Keefe.
You know, I just want to point out how truly brave Nick Shirley and James O'Keefe are. And if you know anything about them, especially James O'Keefe, like, he has been exposed to so much hate and violence and death threats and people coming after him just for being a journalist and exposing the truth. I mean, the things that he says, just like Nick Shirley, they have receipts, they have footage, they can back up all the evidence of what they're saying. And it's just really troubling to see the comments in my chat that they think that they're the frauds, that Nick Shirley is fraudulent or James O'Keefe is fraudulent, when they're literally risking their lives to bring this to the public. They're risking their lives. I think that's a big deal, because they could easily just stop. They don't have to keep reporting on this. They're truly doing a public service. And I know sometimes some people get discouraged and think that, you know, we just talk about the fraud and nothing happens. But we spoke about this a couple weeks ago. Like, there actually is things happening behind the scenes. It just doesn't get reported by the mainstream media. The mainstream media, I just saw, is reporting that Nick Shirley and James O'Keefe are frauds, that it's just a conspiracy theory. There's no fraud happening, and that, you know, people like Nick Shirley and James O'Keefe are the evil ones, and they're trying to hurt immigrants by saying these statements and showing these videos, that they're the fraudulent ones. And again, California enacted the Stop Nick Shirley Act, basically saying it's illegal for you to point out fraud because it makes immigrants look bad. Okay, like, what kind of bizarro world are we living in that there's people out there that actually believe this? And it just hurts us. It just hurts the American people, because that's our taxpayer money that we work so hard for. Americans work so hard. It's hard to live and survive and thrive today in 2026. I mean, inflation is through the roof. There are a lot of people that work 2-3 jobs, have to have multiple businesses just to pay their bills and live comfortably, or just to live at all. So we're not thriving. Some people are, but if you look compared to like 10, 20, 30 years ago, it's not like it used to be. People are really working hard in our country. And the reality is we get taxed on everything. We pay income tax, we pay property tax, we get taxed on tax on tax. Everything is a tax, everything is a fee. So I commend people like Nick Shirley and James O'Keefe. I want to know where my tax money is going, and I want the fraud and the waste to end. I don't mind paying taxes if it's going to the things it's supposed to go to. I don't mind helping somebody in a bad situation that's an American citizen that's worked hard and became disabled, or one of our veterans. I would love my money to go to somebody that's actually in need. But I don't like to waste my time or waste my money. So I don't want my money to just go to fraudulent schemes. And I certainly don't want it to go to, trillionaire corporations, or to congressmen or senators that have been in office for decades and just magically, make 8, 9, 10 figures on a $174,000 salary. So again, I really commend James O'Keefe and Nick Shirley, but I'm just really shocked that there are people out there that think that they're being fraudulent. Like, do you not have a brain? Or not a working one? I don't know.
We'll follow up with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Peters.
Mr. Elder-Gadet, as you know, President Trump fired 19 inspectors general, the independent watchdogs tasked by Congress with fighting waste, fraud, and abuse in government programs. On May 21, 2025, I issued a report that revealed that in fiscal year 24 alone, those fired IGs had collectively identified over $50 billion of government savings through their work. Since then, President Trump has fired additional IGs and has cut funding and staff to the oversight agencies, some by more than a third. So my question for you, sir, is do partisan attacks on independent oversight benefit fraudsters?
Yes, I would say they absolutely benefit fraudsters. They politicize the entire endeavor of going after waste, fraud, and abuse, which is literally the mission statement and reason for existence of watchdogs like Inspector General.
So how can Congress better support and defend independent and nonpartisan oversight of government programs, in your estimation?
Sure. So I touched on this a little bit in my opening statement and in more detail in my written statement, but there are a number of pre-existing entities such as Inspector General, such as the Government Accountability Office, who we don't need to reinvent the wheel there. We just need to strengthen, empower, and protect those entities. We need to give them the resources they need to conduct their important work of oversight. And most importantly, we need to provide more political insulation and independence so that they can do that work without fear or favor and without being overly meddled with by people with partisan and political agendas, because that's anathema to any effective oversight.
All right. Mr. Eller-Gadet, POGO has raised concerns about both President Biden and President Trump's use of presidential pardons. This administration has claimed to care about fraud, and yet President Trump has pardoned a staggering number of convicted fraudsters. To date, he has pardoned over 24 criminals who committed a combined nearly $3 billion in financial crimes and fraud. These pardons also robbed victims of approximately $1.3 billion in restitution payments. They were given to people like Lawrence Duran, who committed $205 million in Medicare fraud, and Trevor Milton, who committed $680 million in securities fraud. Mr. Milton and his wife, not surprisingly, donated $2.5 million to the presidential campaign. So my question for you, sir, is how would you describe pardoning criminal fraudster campaign donors as an effort to combat fraud?
I would describe it as a completely nonsensical approach to rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. And again, it undermines any claims one might have to caring about waste, fraud, and abuse to pardon convicted fraudsters. And in the case of one Florida woman, a multiply convicted fraudster who was convicted once, got a commutation in Trump's first term, and then was convicted again and got a full pardon in the second term. So that does not seem to me like the action of an entity that actually cares about fraud. Perhaps it's just fraud when it's perpetrated by the right people or the wrong people.
So what do you think Congress should do to rein in the misuse of presidential pardon power?
This is a tricky one. The pardon power is, of course, constitutionally prescribed. It's pretty stark. I have a personal hobby horse view that a constitutional amendment to remove the pardon power should probably be considered because it's a vestigial legacy of a sort of monarchical view of the head of state, which is kind of the whole thing we're supposed to be against here in the United States. We don't like kings, and so the pardon power is very much a kingly, a divine right of kings sort of concept. But barring that, I think there are some sort of common sense, constitutionally viable approaches to more transparency, consultation, reporting and disclosure, and a bit of a kind of, I think, a stronger process from within the DOJ's pardon office.
Thank you. You know, I've been proud to enact bipartisan legislation to improve government data analytics, enhance oversight capabilities, and prevent payments to dead people. However, challenges remain, especially as fraudsters have become more sophisticated and government systems and tools have, quite frankly, just not kept pace. In fiscal year 25, government agencies estimated that $186 billion of improper payments were made. So my question for you, Mr. Eller-Gadet, is what practical solutions should Congress prioritize to prevent improper payments and stop fraudulent behavior while still protecting critical programs that Americans rely on every day?
Thank you. Front-end verification is really important. I believe Chairman Paul referred to this in his opening statement. We do not do enough of that. But also end-to-end transparency, reporting and disclosure at every step along the spending and funding chain is critically important. We also don't do much of that. So, I don't need to tell you all this there in Congress, but the appropriations process is you all doing your thing with the money. It goes to federal agencies, then federal agencies award it out to prime recipients, but then those prime recipients tend to parcel it out and award it out to a whole range of different sub-awardees and sub-recipients. That's where we really lose any meaningful insight into where the money's going, who's ending up with it, what is the impact that it's having. So if there's one sort of key, sort of close to a silver bullet I would recommend, is getting our hands around above-award reporting and transparency all the way up and down the chain from end to end.
Thank you.
I think that hits on the point is the payments all coming from the federal government, but the people signing them up are not connected to the payment. So they're in the states, they're local, they want to help people. Oh, I want more people, let's help more people, and they add all the people to it, but they're not paying for it. You have to have the same people paying for it that are signing the people up. And until you connect those two people, you'll continue to have this problem. Senator Langford.
Senator Paul, thanks for holding this hearing as well. To all of you and the work that you do to help identify fraud and waste, thank you for the work on that. It's really about sunshine and trying to expose this out. For 9 years, I've been releasing what my team calls federal fumbles, where we just outline where areas that we see on waste and abuse and loss of federal dollars, over-regulation, and we throw those out there. What's been interesting is we've seen the same thing you have. When we identify the areas of waste, people shrink back away from it and say, okay, now we're going to try to be able to deal with this. It is the sunshine that really does make a difference. And what you're doing is bringing things to light on this. We've identified things like in 2023, the State Department was funding drag shows in Ecuador. The NIH, or NEA, I should say, was doing a social media game to increase physical activity in older women and creating a social media activity, which inherently sit there for that. There was a NEA created a production of what they called the Fat Pig, which was an opera to tell the story of a plus-size woman who falls in love with a man who has, quote unquote, a normal body. We also did an NIH study that gave a research grant to be able to outline the history of tobacco use in Russia. We can go on and on and on through this. There's multiples that are out there. The Biden administration did a $250 million study in NIH to be able to study how to transition mice and monkeys into a different sex and how to create transgender mice and monkeys. All of those, once we exposed them, went away. All of them. So the challenge is trying to be able to highlight it, but also to be able to find it in advance. So I want to run several questions past you, and I've got several big issues. Ms. Shirley, how are you identifying initially what you're actually finding? Like, what's the tip that you're saying, I think there may be fraud there? How are you identifying that?
Yeah, a lot of it's I go through these databases and look for the largest amount of funding, and then also looking for the anomalies that come. For instance, in New York City, at these adult daycares, there were 7,899 patients enrolled into a daycare, an adult daycare, and they received $12.9 million. And I go to that daycare, there's only one floor, and it'd be, quite frankly, impossible to enroll that many patients into that daycare.
Yeah. So it's just going through the available public data on it.
Yes, and then also relying upon Americans. For instance, I learned about the Minnesota fraud from Minnesotans. I went there and they told me, hey, finally, you're here to make a video on the fraud. I said, well, what are you talking about? And they said, well, this fraud's happening, this fraud's happening. And so then after that, for 6 months, I looked for that information about the fraud.
That's great. All right, that's very helpful on this. Mr. Hedler-Godet, I have a question. It's a follow-up question on this. I'm a big advocate for GAO and for Inspector General. You and I have talked about that before. They're incredibly important to us. They are the investigators that Congress has hired basically to be able to put in these different agencies and be able to do oversight. The problem is they have the same access to data that Mr. Shirley has. When we get reports back from them, they're written very general many times, and there's not specifics, and we're not really able to highlight this kind of information, getting the practical information out. So the problem is not GAO and the Inspector General, it's getting the data and the information from them in the rawest form. They could have done this same thing that Mr. Shirley did, but they didn't. What would you suggest to help push good folks there to be able to take the next step and expose what's out there?
Thank you, Senator Langford. And if I might just for one moment, I just want to extend my appreciation to you for your work for years starting in the House on the Taxpayers' Right to Know Act, which you know this well, of course, but I don't know if everyone in this room does, but it created for the first time a federal program inventory, which seemed kind of counterintuitive that such a thing didn't exist for a long time, but thanks to your work on that bill, it now does exist. So I commend you for your longstanding commitment to transparency and oversight when it comes to federal programs.
Appreciate that.
In response to your question, I agree with you that sometimes GAO reports, I mean, I love a good GAO report, but they are often kind of at a higher level of abstraction. They're still extremely valuable, I think, but I think sometimes GAO can get a little bit tentative if it gets too specific.
I describe them as safe. They're trying to write a safe report on a bad
Yeah.
issue of fraud. And I don't need safe, I need raw information. That's what Mr. Shirley is actually
Sure.
bringing, is saying, here's the raw information.
Yeah, I'd be happy to see that too. And I think, I think creating more independence, as I mentioned earlier, for GAO could help with that problem because they would feel less insecure and less scared of potentially, upsetting some particular constituency who may, in fact, have control over their budget, right? So part of this is you really want watchdogs to be as much as possible within the bounds of like constitutional allowability. You want them to be as independent as possible so that they can do their work without fear or favor.
Okay, that's helpful. Mr. Keefe, I'm just going to make a comment to you. Thank you for the work that you're doing on trying to be able to expose issues in our election security. In Oklahoma, we have a very secure election system, and we work very hard on that, verifying. We've got voter ID. If you're going to do mail-in balloting, you have to have a notary to be able to verify that's actually you. We go through a lot of steps to be able to make sure we secure our election. I wish that was so in every state, but it is incredibly important for the trust that we actually have that. So I just want to tell you, I appreciate the work that you're doing. Look forward to getting a chance to read more of what you're doing.
Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Chairman, wouldn't a Democrat go next since the Republican just testified?
If there were a Democrat here, yes.
So there's no Democrats present at a hearing about fraud?
There doesn't appear to be a great deal of interest across the aisle. Senator Scott.
Wait, did he just say that there's no Democrats in this hearing? I think that there was one at the beginning, and Dave was talking about that in here. Did none of the Democrat senators attend this meeting? That's kind of fishy, guys, right? Why wouldn't they want to come to a hearing about fraud and homeland security? I don't think that that is a partisan or a bipartisan issue. I think that affects everybody. Why wouldn't the left come to this hearing? Says a lot.
Thank you, Senator Moreno. It's hard to believe, isn't it? First off, thank you all for caring about election security. So, Mr. O'Keefe, your team returned to Skid Row after the DOJ indicted somebody for election fraud and found the same operation running openly. Cash for signatures, fake voter data, and coaching on forgery. So walk us through what you documented and what it tells you about whether the indictment deterred anybody. How widespread is the model beyond Skid Row in Los Angeles? Based on your investigation, do you think this model could easily be replicated in other states and cities around the country?
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, within seconds of appearing on Skid Row, I personally, disguised as a homeless person, caught this behavior happening in broad daylight. So it's happening thousands of times. And I wanted to mention the names of these organizations, these petitioners that gather signatures to put on these initiatives in California. Urban Signers is one. One More petition is another. So Brenda Brown was indicted by the Department of Justice, but the question remains, who's on the top orchestrating all of this? That's something we intend to find out, and I will be submitting to Senator Ron Johnson a request for subpoena to gather more information about that. And also, these people are logging in to an online database called sigvalid.com and pulling real names and voters. Those people's votes are disenfranchised. We went to their homes and we knocked on the door of them, and one of them said, what if I wanted to vote in this election? So this is a completely nonpartisan, non-political issue. Mayor Karen Bass, the LADA, and the governor of California did not criticize me. They actually put statements out saying this is outrageous and needs to be exposed.
So what's happened since?
The Department of Justice has indicted, but nobody in the state of California has yet arrested or prosecuted these people.
And what's Gavin Newsom done?
Put out a statement condemning the stuff that we exposed in the tape. That's it.
So doesn't he have investigation authority?
He does in the state of California.
Doesn't Karen Bass?
She does.
And is it against the law?
It is. It's a state crime, fraudulently putting someone else's name on the California ballot petition.
So in California, they're not going to prosecute this. If it wasn't for the federal government, nothing would happen.
I'm sorry?
If it wasn't for the federal government, nothing would happen.
So far, we have to put tremendous pressure and find a way to incentivize these elected officials to do the right thing.
Right. So have they also impacted ballot initiatives in California with invalid signatures?
Yes, these signatures are regarding California state elections.
Okay. And these NGOs, can you find out where they're getting the money?
We
Is it
did.
State money, federal money, county money?
Yes, we did covertly interview some of the NGOs across the street. Weingard is one. They received hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. And these NGOs are located literally across the street from the fraud that is happening. I testified that one man who represented himself, it was an NGO, pretended to be a police officer to intimidate my news organization from reporting on this abuse. That is also a state crime. So the NGOs see it happening, and in our story actually encouraged it. They said, here's where you can do the cash for ballots. And those NGOs receive billions of dollars of federal funding.
Why are they getting, what are they getting the money for? Under what premise do they get money?
It's the California Homeless Industrial Complex. They're there to help, protect, and advance the mission of supporting the homeless population. But our reporting showed that the homeless here are actually the victims. We interviewed a lot of the homeless, and they were testifying to me that they were being taken advantage of. And all it takes is a few cigarettes, some marijuana, a few dollars, which doesn't sound like a lot to you and I, but it helps them buy a cheeseburger. So they're the victims, and that's what they told us.
Did you follow the Spencer Pratt race?
You know, it's really cruel what they do in California. It's really cruel to just allow your citizens to roam the street, do drugs all day and night, live in filthy tents, and then use them to commit voter fraud. And people are using these homeless people for other scams too. There's a bunch of scams that exist. I think there was like a documentary on Netflix about that. But it's really cruel for the state of California to allow this. Because there's things that they could do to help them. And God knows they get billions of dollars every year to fight homelessness. But they purposely don't do what they need to do to help these people because they want to continue getting that money. And Spencer Pratt brought that to light when he was running for mayor. And I just think it's really cruel because these people obviously need help. Most of them are addicted to drugs. They need help. That's no way to live. It's really mean that this is what the state of California does to their citizens. It's very cruel, in my opinion.
Were you surprised that he went from being the runner-up to being out of the race?
All I can do, and all I can think about is tracing who's behind this fraud at the top. That's my interest, and that's my priority, is because all the stuff you see out there is all circumstantial evidence. But what the U.S. Attorney told me is the fact that we caught the cash exchange on camera, it led to an indictment. So I want to know who's orchestrating it at the top, and I intend to find out.
Do you think the U.S. Attorney will go after the NGO?
He did what he told me he said he was going to do, but we need non-circumstantial evidence. We need direct cash payments on tape, incontrovertible evidence for the Department of Justice to do their job. I feel like that's my role. I feel citizen journalists don't have to deal with bureaucracy. We could just go there and get the story in a day, and that's what we intend to do.
All right, thanks for what you're doing.
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. And let me just point out again for the record that I think preventing fraud in government should be completely nonpartisan. It's not a Democrat issue or a Republican issue, yet almost the entirety of the Republican dais is filled with people sitting here listening to the entire hearing, and literally the entire Democrat dais is empty. I think that's, quite frankly, a disgrace. I think it's a disgrace to the people who pay taxes to know that there's an entire party that does not care whether taxpayer money is burnt. I think it's absolutely, completely outrageous. Mr. Shirley, I'll start with you. The previous Controller General of the GAO had been in office since 2011. What were you doing in 2011?
Playing football and basketball.
And what grade were you in?
At that time, I was 9 years old. So
9? Gotcha. So you were 9 years old, and this person served for 15 years in government. We have this idea that maybe we double down on that process that failed for 15 years, that somehow we'd be better off, and yet you went in at your risk and exposed fraud. How does I'm going to take a different angle. How does it make you feel as somebody who's 25 years old to know that your generation is going to pay the bill for everything that's happened right now? We have $40 trillion in debt,
Yeah, I
and
think,
yet your generation is going to pay the price.
yeah, I think that's the sad thing is my generation's the one who's affected the most from this fraud and from the national debt. It's extremely hard for anyone my age to buy a home, even just to be able to accumulate the money to have a down payment inside your bank account. It's very, very hard. And so when you see a fraudster who literally opens up a Leering Center and they receive $1.9 million, and that was going on for years, and no one ever did anything. We had all this oversight. We had all, like, everyone knew about the fraud, but everyone was too afraid to talk about the fraud because of what would happen to them.
And what do you mean what would happen to them? Is it impolite that's to say that somebody's defrauding the government because there's of some certain race or gender or national origin? Is that somehow racist to say you should not steal money from the federal government?
It's not racist, but politically it can be seen as racist. They may label you as Islamophobic or a racist, quite frankly.
Well, I think profiles in courage wouldn't be something that would be written about the current members of the Democrat Party for sure. And because, again, you think you would agree that they're just afraid of being labeled that way, and that fear drives them away from even attending a hearing like today?
Yeah, definitely. And it's very sad to see that they put that's their priorities, is to make sure that they're not labeled as a racist or Islamophobic for exposing fraud or for exposing what's happening inside a community. Quite frankly, they use the Somali population to commit the fraud. Ilhan Omar should be disgraced of what she did to the Somali population.
And when you look at people in your generation can't afford a car, can't afford a house, don't see how in the future you'd be able to retire with any kind of dignity, and yet somebody can break into our country illegally, be provided a luxury hotel room in New York, 3 meals a day, maid service once a week, free education, free health care. What goes through your head when you think about that?
Like, how does this happen? We're putting foreigners oftentimes above American citizens, and it's very, very sad to see.
And Mr. Hetler-Gadet, I want to drill back down to the numbers you provided because I want to make sure I heard them correctly. You talked about, again, we're here to talk about fraud. We can talk about waste in a different hearing. We're here to talk about fraud. You mentioned in 2025, what was the number that you said? You knew the numbers off the top of your head pretty well. It's impressive.
GAO estimated that in fiscal year 2025, we issued $186 billion in improper payments.
So $186 billion in 2025. From 17 to 20, which is President Trump's first term, that number by GAO is estimated to be $672 billion. Does that sound right?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but
sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah, generally. Again, GAO citing their numbers. And from 2020 to 2024, that number under Biden was $925 billion.
So I would point out 2020 is still the Trump administration.
No, this is fiscal year, so this would start October 1st.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a 38% increase, and it's been massively cut back by President Trump in his second term. I don't know that that's the greatest case to be made, that the entire issue is because we have these inspector generals that have failed dramatically since the time Nick Shirley was playing basketball in his driveway when he was 9 years old. I think what we need to do here, Mr. Chairman, is take this topic very seriously. I think the American people are sick and tired of hearings, honestly. I think they need to see people who are held accountable, that go to jail. And until we do that, I don't know that we have the confidence of people. I feel badly for next generation, honestly. I don't know how they look at it and say, this government's just failing us. And the sense of disenfranchisement with the American government. I mean, I just can't wrap my head around the fact that Democrats care so little about this topic that they don't even show up. They didn't show up at your session either, Senator Johnson, when we talked about this exact topic in your committee. And ultimately, if your elected leaders don't give a crap about how government spends money, it's an indictment on that. And even worse, the media just won't even talk about it. There will be more stories on CNN tonight about the reflecting pond being empty than the fact that you had a hearing today about trillions of dollars of fraud. And that is the problem. The media is complicit. The Democrats are complicit because that's ultimately, you have to think, what keeps them in power. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ernst.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here today as well, because a lot of you are deciding to go face to face with a lot of the fraudsters that are ripping off our taxpayers. And you're exposing the corruption that the typical mainstream media and our federal government and state governments have been ignoring, and in some cases actually enabling. So I've learned the hard way through many, many years of working on fraud, waste, and abuse within the federal government that this type of work doesn't earn you a lot of friends. So because of the work that all of you are doing, I just want to say thank you so much on behalf of all of my Iowans and all of our taxpayers across the country. Americans are sending their tax dollars to Washington. You know what? They deserve to know how those taxpayer dollars are being spent. And they need to know that the money that they have worked really hard for is being safeguarded and responsibly spent. And I found this really shocking in a lot of the work that I've done, that every single day, we are losing, as a federal government, $1.4 billion to fraud. That's not a week, that's not a month. That's every single day, 1.4. And that's just a fraud. That doesn't include all of the waste and abuse that we have in the federal government. That's a lot of money that has gone missing without anybody noticing, or in some cases even caring. So I've always said it, but if you can't find waste, fraud, or abuse in Washington, it's simply because you're not looking. You're not looking. So our witnesses have taken a hard look at this issue. I appreciate it. You have given Americans an opportunity to see what is happening with their own eyes. And because of that, the content has gone viral. So, Nick, we all know this. We've all seen this. So for the folks that are out there watching, YouTube journalist Nick Shirley's visit to the Quality Leering Center helped all of us leer how easy it is to get away with fraud in Minnesota. The Leering Center was given $10 million of taxpayer money to provide child care, yet Mr. Shirley's footage showed that there were not even any children present. Despite what we were able to see with our own eyes, Minnesota officials insisted that the Leering Center and other questionable child care centers exposed by Nick Shirley were, quote, operating as expected. And folks, that is exactly the problem. It's the grift that keeps on giving. Mr. Shirley, two whistleblowers who are career civil servants with the Minnesota state government testified before a committee that I chair that they reported suspected fraud, including with these child care centers, years before you made it a national story. And I want everyone to recognize this is not a Democrat-Republican problem, because one of those witnesses is a Democrat. She is a lifelong Democrat, and she was a whistleblower because why? Because some of the programs she was exposing for fraud, her family had relied upon when she was a child. And she recognized that the dollars that were committed to some of these programs with good intent were not going to the families that truly needed those taxpayer dollars. So those two whistleblowers, guess what happened? They were retaliated against because they brought the issue to light. And likewise, you are called a, quote, delusional conspiracy theorist, end quote, by Minnesota Governor Walz and accused of, quote, grandstanding by the state's attorney general. And similarly, when you expose Medicare hospice fraud in California, Governor Newsom's office responded by tweeting, quote, Shirley is the fraud. So, Mr. Shirley, why do you think politicians are trying to stop people like you who are exposing corruption rather than those who are actually committing the fraud?
Well, first off, it's very sad that two governors of the United States would even post that about somebody who's exposing fraud. All I've done is try to help America, and I've done it. They quite frankly aren't. That's why they're so angry about it, because they actually rely upon the fraud in order to continue to push their agendas inside their states.
Right.
That's why they get so mad when the fraud gets exposed, because that money oftentimes goes back into the hands of not necessarily the politicians, but what fuels those politicians to be able to do what they want to do inside their state.
Right, and it's a sad state of affairs. But what we see every day, Washington is losing up to $521 billion to fraud every year. The offices of Inspector General have a combined yearly budget of nearly $4 billion. Similarly, GAO has an annual budget of more than $800 million. And I share that because they have hundreds of investigators and auditors at their disposal. Do you have billions of dollars at your disposal and endless resources to enable you to uncover fraud?
No, not at all. In fact, I have to spend tens of thousands of dollars just to stay safe now because
Yeah.
of posts just like that from governors of the United States of America.
Exactly. And so with very little resources, you have been able to uncover fraud. And yet our federal government doesn't seem to be able to track it down. So I know I'm out of time. I've gone over, but it doesn't take millions and billions of dollars to expose fraud. We have to do a better job. I do have a bill, a package that I have proposed. Senator Thune has charged me with doing this. A number of people, including the chair, have bills, anti-fraud bills that have been included in this anti-fraud package. We are hoping to be able to move it on the floor of the Senate very soon. And it really is a common sense move to doing the right thing for our taxpayers. So I really appreciate it. Senator Paul, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for holding this hearing. We need to take care of this issue. It's the right thing to do. Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Moody.
Mr. Chairman, I think this is one of the most important hearings that we have had since I'm one of the newest United States senators, which just proves that the least senior people can actually move and be the loudest. This is one of the most important things that we could be doing right now as a Congress. And it comes right to me, another Republican, because there's not another Democrat here to question any of you who represent a wide swath of the political spectrum, I imagine, on what is happening right now in our country. And I appreciate my colleague, Senator Ernst. We are going to miss her immensely in her fight against fraud and waste in this country. I am going to miss her immensely. As many of you know, she is retiring from the Senate. But I thank her for putting up these tweets as a reminder. And Nick Shirley, you spoke about this. I love that you are, by the way, 24 years old. And you took something you started, I want to say as young as 16 or something, disrupting things. And man, does this bureaucracy and I would say cover up need disrupting. And boy, does it take somebody like you that is fine with that because you're driven by passion for protecting your generation, because you're coming after all of us and will feel this immensely in the debt that you inherit. And I am so grateful to you for showing up here and showing that age, no matter where you're from, Americans should demand that their government is accountable to them and are good stewards of their money. And boy, am I so impressed by you, and I hope that your family is as well. But I'm so glad that we have these, because I just want to point out, and this is nothing that I prepared for, but Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, do you remember when he wanted to be our vice president and was bragging that all of these types of new small businesses were reasons why he should be trusted with leading? Yes. And now we're determining what all these small businesses like the Leering Center were. He used this as a reason that he gave the American people of why he should leave. So why are we surprised that immediately he's defensive and comes after a young kid that's trying to point out on behalf of his generation where this money is really going and this fraud? And look at what the leader of California said. Did he really say, in response to you uncovering just astronomical fraud and waste, that, and I want to quote this because I am appalled by it. Did he really say, slow, surely is the fraud?
Yes, he did.
I didn't misread that. That wasn't misprinted.
No.
So
directly from
somebody that wants to be the leader of the
Democratic Party and show his great, I guess, character is demeaning you and calling you names and ridiculing you? Really?
Yes, that is Gavin Newsom.
I would suggest that anyone could see what this is. This is, oh my goodness, we just got caught. Let's throw out a bunch of blood in the water, go after other people, make sure people blame it on somebody else, but don't pay attention to us. What is that, like ink?
This is what I said at the beginning. This is what the left does. They just blame the right or anybody accusing them of basically everything they're doing. So they're committing like egregious fraud. So what do? What's their go-to defense? They're going to call Nick Shirley a fraud. He's the one that is committing fraud, not them. Forget the fact that he has tons of proof, video coverage, evidence. I mean, he's got the receipts and the paper trail. You know, just billions of Medicaid fraud and God knows what else. But no. He's the fraudster because he pointed it out. This is like just a typical page from their playbook. It's rather funny, but like the sad thing is the people that believe this, that are regurgitating this, they're in my chat right now calling Nick Shirley a fraud because CNN and the mainstream media told them to say that. And they don't want to know the truth. They don't want to see it for themselves. They would rather like just be enraged and just spew lies because the news told them to say that. That's the sad thing. Anybody defending this nonsense, it's really ignorant. It's really sad to me.
Yes, and actually Gavin Newsom just yesterday, he's giving now $20 million to a local journalist. They're going to be able to get grants up to $250,000 to do journalism inside of California. He's essentially paying for good press with our tax dollars as well.
I have to also commend my other colleague, Mr. Johnson, who was saying, you know, in California, instead of the Stop Nick Shirley Act, they should call it Protect Fraudsters Act. I mean, truly, this should be a wake-up call to everyone in America that the people that the Dems want to put in charge of their parties and in charge of their government, as soon as something is brought to their attention in a good faith way, their response is not to say, let's roll up our sleeves and dig in. The response is to say, nothing to see here. The person that bringing up is, let me make sure I have this, slow and a fraud himself. And let's propose legislation not only so that we can keep covering it up, but that we can go after them.
Yes, and I wanted this to be on the record. Never once has a Democrat politician ever congratulated me or said thank you for exposing this, or even reached out to say, hey, maybe come check out what's happening inside of our state. They are, quite frankly, complicit in the fraud. And that's why none of them are here today. Like,
maybe
what is this?
Complicit, trying to cover up something, aiding and abetting,
100%.
promoting their own political careers over tax-paying, hardworking Americans. I thank you. You know, there is an entire fraud economy. I thank President Trump and his administration that is uncovering this. It's positive news that they're uncovering more and more of it, but it is sad that we are seeing so much of it. When I came to Washington, I was like, we need to take a machete to all of the bureaucracy, all of the, this has always been, there's always, every time I bring up a problem, the Dem response is, we've always had fraud, or we've always had coercion of individuals, or we've always had this, but they never once say, let's do something about it. So I would actually ask my colleagues, I have proposed in response to this, if we want to do something about it, if we want to be aggressive, we need to start proposing solutions. I thank my colleague, Senator Ernst. I have also proposed the Stop Child Care Scams Act, the Stop Fraud and Medicaid Act, the No Aid for Ghost Students Act, Punishing Healthcare Fraudsters Act. This is just a few that we are working on with my colleague, Senator Schmidt. We have launched a Senate task force against fraud. And I know they don't like to talk about fraud. They get really itchy when we talk about any kind of fraud, especially election fraud. And instead of saying, okay, let's explore what people are saying, or trying to discredit them or picking someone that knows nothing about it when they come into hearing and saying, did President Trump win the election? The person would have no way of knowing, and making them say that, and see, they said that. Instead of actually exploring fraud and doing something about it, I think we need to make sure that we don't just we don't just address it, we don't just ask what we can do, but we bolster the American people's trust in our elections. And the way we do that is to follow the Florida blueprint. We used to be a national embarrassment with the hanging chads, getting ballot results after everybody went to sleep, days later. Within just 2 decades, we've turned that around. We have results by bedtime. People trust Florida elections. We can do that in this nation, which is why I want to propose legislation that says ballots by election day. Ballots by election day. So people have faith in the results of their elections. Mr. O'Keefe, and I'm over time, but is this something you think would bring better trust by Americans in our elections if we could announce results by election day, ballots in by election days, excluding military, of course?
Senator, I do. Citizenship verification answers whether a person is eligible, but it does not answer whether the applicant is that person. And that's what we saw in California. So federal reform should require identity to be verified before a registration gets active. I think Congress should look at that as well.
Thank you. And thank you for.
So I want to point this out to you guys because I repeatedly see comments pretty much every night when I stream these hearings that people believe that nothing is being done about the fraud, that we just have these hearings and nothing happens, no one gets arrested. That's actually not true. The problem is that most of the mainstream media just does not report on what is happening behind the scenes. But if you go to the Department of Justice website, they have several press releases, and also on YouTube, they have videos of the press releases that were done on camera. And there were a few that I watched right before July 4th. So I just want to bring this to your attention because I don't want you guys to think that nothing happens, because that's not true. There's a lot that is happening behind the scenes, and people are getting in trouble. They are getting prosecuted, arrested, having to pay fines. So I just want to list for you guys, you know, some of the arrests that have been made just in the last 3 months. So the first one was a 2026 national healthcare fraud takedown, which occurred June 23rd, 2026. This was the DOJ's largest healthcare fraud operation to date. The DOJ announced that 455 defendants were charged and more than $6.5 billion in alleged fraud. 90 physicians and licensed medical professionals. Cases were filed in 56 different federal districts. There was a record number of Medicaid fraud defendants, 295 defendants, involving more than $518 million in alleged false Medicaid claims. These schemes included false Medicare billing, Medicaid billing for services never performed, hospice fraud, home health fraud, durable medical equipment scams, wound care fraud, kickback conspiracies, telemedicine fraud, substance abuse treatment fraud, and identity theft used to bill Medicare and Medicaid. Some of the largest cases included in this was a California hospice operator accused of tens of millions in fraudulent Medicare billing, a Florida physician accused of an approximately $89 million cardiovascular testing scheme, mental health companies billing Medicaid for non-existent services, and wound allograft schemes spanning in multiple states. Now, there were some cases that were specifically prosecuted that involved immigrants. So an example of this is there was an investigation involving operators of New York Medicaid transportation companies, Carl's Cab and Latham Taxi. And the defendants' names were Mohammed Zishan, Madiha Javed, and Ghazali Shaikh, who were accused of bribing Medicaid recipients and fraudulently billing nearly $5 million. They have been charged with conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and paying illegal kickbacks. We don't know, though, if they were legal or illegal immigrants. And then there's several nationwide schemes involving international money laundering networks, overseas call centers, shell companies, and foreign bank accounts, particularly in Eastern Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. And those investigations focus on transnational criminal organizations. And then there's also some notable cases involving Russian organized crime. And apparently there's one notable investigation discussed recently which involves a Russian criminal network. And according to investigators, the group allegedly obtained control of approximately 30 Medicare-enrolled companies. It allegedly attempted to bill roughly $10 billion. More than $1 billion was allegedly laundered internationally. The participants reportedly operated largely from outside the U.S., using stolen identities and U.S.-based nominee owners. So, actually, the DOJ has been doing a lot in the last few months. Like I said, what I'm telling you just happened June 23rd, that the majority of those prosecutions came in June 23rd. But compared with previous years, the DOJ has now shifted significant attention towards Medicaid fraud, home health care agencies, hospice fraud, behavioral health fraud, durable medical equipment, wound care, AI-assisted fraud detection, international fraud rings, and identity theft involving Medicare beneficiaries. So I don't want you guys to keep commenting, oh, nothing happens, nobody gets arrested, because that's not true. What is true is that CNN, NBC, MSNBC, ABC News, you know, all the big guys do not report on this. They're just not reporting. So we get disenfranchised and we think, oh, nothing's happening. You know, we're just watching political theater, but that's not true. And if you don't believe me, just go on the DOJ website. You can read it for yourself or search it on YouTube. You can see these videos yourself, but there are things happening. People are getting in trouble. They're being arrested. They're paying fines. And the DOJ now has made a huge effort and is doing a great job to prosecute these fraudsters. So I don't want you to think that nothing's happening. It's not true. It is happening. And we need to keep streaming these hearings. We need to keep talking about this. We need to keep uncovering these things because things are getting done. All right, let's continue.
Being here today, all of you, we very much appreciate it.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Shirley, I just want to start with you. I, for my part, want to say thank you for the terrific work you've done on exposing fraud all across the country, nowhere more so than in the state of Minnesota. You know, it's a funny thing. Not long ago, the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota was sitting right where you're sitting, Keith Ellison. And I had a question or two for him about the fraud in that state. And he said to me that, I mean, nobody could have found it. I mean, he didn't know anything about it. You know, he was completely in the dark until it was all blown open, and there's just nothing that would have tipped him off. I find that interesting because, near as I can tell, I mean, you were a 24-year-old independent journalist. You had a camera and a list of public spending records, right?
Correct.
So how did, if this fraud was so hard to find, how did you manage to find it when none of the public officials in Minnesota could find it?
I simply went to the locations of the Leering centers and the daycares and asked to enroll a child, and there was no way to enroll a child into any of these daycares. In fact, there were no children to be seen anywhere.
So in other words, you asked a few questions and you looked. You actually looked to see if there was fraud.
Yes.
And you found it wide open everywhere, rampant.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
And a lot of the Medicaid programs inside of Minnesota, from the non-emergent school vehicles, the transportation companies.
You know, I find it so interesting because Keith Ellison, when he was Attorney General way back in 2018, 2019, I think we've got a poster to this effect, was actually told and had multiple referrals made to his office about fraud in some of the very programs that you looked at. I mean, this is years ago now. He had official referrals made to him. He said, I just couldn't find any evidence of the fraud. Do you think maybe there's a little bit of corruption at the governmental level in the state of Minnesota? I mean, is that just maybe a possibility? Maybe some of these guys are maybe on the take, you think? I mean, possible?
Yeah, it's not even maybe or possibly, it's a certainty.
Yeah, I would say so too, and I can prove it to you. Keith Ellison, that guy, after overlooking $250 million in fraud, he took $10,000 in campaign contributions from the very people who were committing the fraud, who came to see him in his office, asked him to please get state investigators off of their backs, which he did, asked him to shut down the investigations, which he helped with, offered to give him money, which he accepted. I mean, I think that's the answer as to why can't any of these people find the fraud? Because they're getting paid by the fraudsters. And here you are, 24 years old, got a camera, got the public records, ask a few questions, and it's everywhere to be seen. I mean, this kind of corruption, and it's what, sadly, the Democrat Party wants to bring to this country all across America. I don't know why guys like Ellison are not being prosecuted, I have to tell you. And he sat there and lied under oath right where you're sitting now. I asked him why he took this money. He said, oh, I didn't take a dime. He took $10,000. It's on the record. I just want to commend you for what you've done. Mr. O'Keefe, I want to thank you for being here as well. I want to thank you particularly for your investigations, so many of them, but particularly those into anti-Christian bias. I want to ask you just about Trevor Williams of the Washington Nationals. You found that Trevor Williams was shut down, he was muffled, he was gagged by his own team because he had the audacity to say that he didn't think that this poster, I think we got a picture of this, that this outrageous desecration of the Last Supper by this group that calls itself the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which is an anti-Christian group that actively mocks Catholics and other Christians. You know, he said he didn't like this, and for that reason, if I remember correctly, the Washington Nationals tried to shut him down. Tell us just about what your investigation found.
This is involving the Washington Nationals baseball team and civil rights violations and anti-Christian bias. And the Washington Nationals has fired this vice president for his bias against Christians. And it's part of our expose exposing officials in corporations and in the administrative state, the deep state, breaking the law, pushing back. We have another one coming out inside the Pentagon in the next few days with similar themes.
Well, I look forward to that. Let me just say this. Were you surprised at all, given your investigation of the Trevor Williams incident, were you surprised at all when the commissioner of baseball just a few weeks ago threatened to penalize and fine players, 2 players on the Giants who put Bible verses onto one on their cap, I think one on their jersey? The commissioner of baseball came out and said, oh, that's against our rules. We're going to fine you. It was absolutely outrageous. Did that?
Wait. They got fined for having Bible verses on their uniforms, but literally we have baseball teams that just wear the entire rainbow during June, and that's like praised. What country are we living in? What? Oh my gosh, I don't have a problem with either thing, but I have a problem with we're going to demonize somebody that wants to be proud about their religious beliefs, but glorify somebody that is praising gay pride. That doesn't make sense to me. They should both be able to do what they want to do and put whatever they want on their jersey. But I think it's kind of crazy that we're going to side with the rainbow team, but shame somebody that put like a Bible verse on their jersey. That's just my opinion.
Surprise you, given the sort of systemic bias, if I could use that phrase that you
Nothing
found?
surprises me. There's a lot of irony and absurdity in reality, but it does not shock me. And I think sunlight, to quote Brandeis, is the best disinfectant. So they might do some things in open, but I think it's possible to shame the devil by capturing these candid remarks behind closed doors where they really talk about their intent and their motivation. And that video caused a firestorm. And, you know, to quote Nick Shirley, the video does not film itself. The citizen journalists get to show up and do the thing. And I think it's more difficult for bureaucrats to do that. So citizen journalists are going to do it.
That's great. Well, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, and I think partly because of what you exposed, the kind of bias you exposed in the Trevor Williams case, the commissioner of Major League Baseball had to back down.
Yes.
When we confronted him on this issue and admit, actually, the rules permit the players to write these things on their jerseys if they so choose. They permit the players to forego wearing politically themed jerseys at all, and he committed to me in writing that none of these players will ever be fined or disciplined for expressing their faith. But you and I both know he wouldn't have done that had he not been embarrassed by the facts that you and others brought forward. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. I think a video might be worth 10,000 words. It's been said that, well, you know, these are sensationalistic and this isn't the proper way to do it, young man, and we shouldn't be doing this and this isn't, leave this to the government. But I think the point's also been made very clearly. The government has these inspector generals, has a GAO. I'm a fan of both of those groups, but I don't know if they have any inspectors. I mean, that actually go out on the road, any video, anybody's going and checking on this. So I think what you've shown people is what can happen with pictures, I mean, with video. And the pictures made a big difference. As you said, it's a normal virality of these videos. But there have actually been indictments, I think at least 15 indictments, 90 million, 100 million. I mean, an enormous amount of money now is being recovered and been found to misspent. I think that when we look at things, sometimes, though, we get lost in just the bad people. And there are bad people, and there always will be bad people. That's why we have to police things. And companies do it instantaneously. You know, Visa, they're instantaneously catching fraud. Your bank's catching fraud. Everybody is. And so we scratch our head and ask, why isn't government? You know, why didn't government have someone like Nick Shirley that worked for them? Why weren't we doing this? And there's a systemic problem, and the systemic problem is worth looking at because systemic problems can fix thousands of downstream problems. The systemic problem is basically this. You sign up for welfare at the state level. The payment comes from the federal level. The states look at federal payment as free because we have a printing press up here. We just add it to the national debt, the $40 trillion debt, the numbers that are spiraling out of control. But food stamps, Medicaid, you sign up at the state level. So if you tell a state that we're going to pay for 90% or 100% of Medicaid if you expand it, is there any incentive for them to check people's credentials to make sure they're eligible for Medicaid or for food stamps? Is there any incentive to go like you did to the autism center? No, because they're not paying for it. So the states have no incentive. So one of the things Senator Johnson and I and several others wanted to get added to a bill last year was trying to change some of these percentages. So ever since Obamacare, Obamacare enticed all the states to expand Medicaid. And a lot of these programs come under the auspices of Medicaid. The government paid 100% of it for like 3 years. And now 15 years later, the government's still paying 90%. The rest of Medicaid's closer to 50-50 or 45-55, so the states have some skin in the game. If they allow too much fraud to occur, they're paying for part of the fraud. But if 90% of it's paid to the federal government, you're not paying fraud. We had a proposal that would have changed the formula back to this split formula where states pay about half and the federal government pays half. And I think it was an $800 billion savings over about 10 years. And so we have to do the fraud. We have to police the fraud. We should be learning from what you guys are doing with investigative reporting. We should hire investigators. If we like inspector generals, why don't they have a team of investigators that are going out and doing what you're doing? So we should do that, but we also have to, as a legislature, look at these ratios and at these split performances, and you have to connect them. The people paying have to be doing the oversight. Some of it's happening, but only because you brought it to light. Without these videos that some are calling sensationalistic, there'd be none of this. It just went on year after year, decade after decade. And I think this is the tip of the iceberg, and I commend you for what you've both done with exposing this. As far as the subpoena power, I'm happy to work with Senator Johnson on this, and I think we can look into particularly the harvesting. You know, in Wisconsin, when they had the difficulty or the mass mail-in ballots in 2020, when probably, over half of your ballots were cast by mail, there was said to be 100,000 that weren't even signed, you know, that there was no witness signature. Well, we should be looking into the harvesting. If there is evidence that with harvesting, people are harvesting ballots in an illegal or illegitimate way, that should be looked into. And so I'm happy to look at these companies, and we are happy to work with both of you on any information you have to bring to us. And I, for one, commend you for your work on this and what you brought to our attention. I think Senator Johnson had another question or two.
I do, and quite honestly, along the same lines that Mr. Hitler got it. Aren't you as disappointed as I am? I've been doing this for now 16 years. We've had POGO come in. I've been supportive of IGs. I've been supportive of the GAO. Just hasn't worked. I know in your testimony you say that IGs have saved $71 billion. I mean, that's probably self-reported, self-serving type of report. We still have $250 billion to $1 trillion of fraud occurring. It's just not working. And Senator Paul is putting his finger on the problem here. When it's free money, you don't care about it. I mean, in his opening statement, he talked about what private sector companies do to prevent fraud on the front end. That's what we have to do. So again, I would really encourage POGO to, rather than let's fund more IGs, let's put more money into GAO. I mean, again, I'm supportive of it if it would work, but it doesn't. And recognize that, so we're either going to have to completely reform how those bodies operate, but we've got to look at the root cause of these things. We have to align the incentives. I mean, the 9-to-1 match is just, it's legalized fraud. In Medicaid, in provider fees, provider taxes, that's not health care. I literally had a hospital lobby me when we passed the big, beautiful bill that was going to restrain the percent of provider taxes. Wisconsin was pretty low. I think we're at 1.8. Passed the bill right away to go to 6%. And apparently didn't do it quickly enough, so Dr. Oz wasn't going to give us the waiver to allow us to increase the provider tax up to 6%. So we had a hospital, through an intermediary lobby me to say, but try and get Dr. Oz to grant us that waiver, because this is what we'll be able to charge a $12 million provider tax. We'll get reimbursed for $18 million, so we'll come out $6 million ahead. And they're not even thinking. I mean, you literally are asking for government to allow you to tax your customers $12 million so you can make additional $6 million. Again, it's legalized fraud. So until we are willing to address the root cause of the problem, that all this free federal government money is not being administered by the states properly, they don't care. They don't care to check eligibility. They get credit for providing all this health care for all their citizens. They don't care about the eligibility. They don't care that a third of the hospice centers are in Los Angeles County, that when you defund 400 of them, none of them even complain. They just don't care. So I guess that's my question to you. Head of POGO, which I think is a great organization, focus on the root cause. Focus on the legalized fraud, the way these programs are set up. You want to comment on that?
Yes, please, if you wouldn't mind, Senator. Thank you so much. One thing I just want to point out, and this has been brought up a couple other times, but GAO, Inspector General, these oversight entities, they are at their core providers of information. They have no power to change legislation or change policy. When they expose things or when they tell you, here's how you could save X amount of dollars, they can't actualize that savings. They can come to Congress and ask you all to do those things, but then it's up to Congress. Congress is the body that can actually change the law, change policy. So I think it's just like a little bit unfair to say the reason we still have fraud is because GAO and IG
and I completely agree. GAO has all these reports, but they don't get implemented.
Yeah.
And they don't get implemented because if you say you want to actually reduce the legalized fraud in Medicaid, we get accused of slashing it. Do you realize Medicaid is up 10% year over year? We didn't cut Medicaid. We didn't even begin to control it. Didn't even scratch the surface. And that's my point here, is we need to understand how pervasive and how rampant this fraud is. We need to address the actual problem, how these laws are written to be taken advantage of, to create fraud, to let the fraudsters get away. We didn't talk about potentially the foreign organization of this, correct? I mean, $700 million in cash flowing out of the Minneapolis airport back to countries in Africa. Have either of you gentlemen kind of investigated the foreign sourcing or an organization of a lot of this fraud? I mean, we're opening up to foreign governments to fund their own operations.
Well, yeah, it's been proven that a lot of the money in suitcases that left Minnesota went back into the hands of people inside Somalia. And for instance, in New York City, where I just did an expose exposing this adult daycare fraud, nobody at these daycares actually knows who the owner is. A lot of them had just been hired within the past month. In Miami, you have the Cuban government running these DME companies that are fleecing and quite literally looting from Medicaid. A lot of foreign governments have infiltrated our Medicaid because it's so simple and so easy to defraud.
By the way, we know it's $700 million because government watched it go out. They let it go. They didn't even put the IRS on the case. It's truly remarkable what we're allowing to happen here. So again, Mr. Chairman, I commend you, like Senator Ernst did, for holding this hearing, and Ashley Moody. This is an incredibly important hearing, and it speaks volumes that only the ranking member showed up to, denigrate Mr. Shirley's efforts, quite honestly. That was why he showed up, and not one of them are here talking about these hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars worth of fraud that we can't allow to continue, because we are mortgaging your future. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The autism centers that were abusing this, it's under which program, and did they sign up in the state? How do you sign up for the program?
It's underneath Medicaid. I can't say exactly what one it is, but
It's part of Medicaid.
part of Medicaid, yeah.
And so it gets back to this overarching, I mean, if we're talking big pools of money, Medicaid's this big pool of money, but it's this split between the federal and the state government. And we do have to look at it. It's the only way we fix this. And the thing is people look at it and they say, oh, you want to take away health care from poor people. There's another way of looking at this is, what about preserving health care for the very poor people who do need it, and getting rid of, somebody that's able-bodied who's lying about a disability and is on Medicaid is actually taking money away from a deserving person. So I think there's another way of looking at that. But people are very, very fearful of any kind of dollars. They think if you were to cut $1 from Medicaid, that it's being taken away. But if they can be made to see that, yeah, you're taking away from some guy stealing 10, 15, 20 million, or $700 million. So I think this is a good hearing, and I think this may lead us to some other things that we can talk about, both with in the voting fraud atmosphere as well as more. So keep in touch with us and let us know more. Did you have a final comment, Senator Ertz, that you want to make?
Of course, we always have a final comment. But no, again, just really appreciate our witnesses coming today and sharing information with us, and just reinforcing that we need to do our job as Congress as well to ensure that when we do identify areas of fraud and loopholes that exist within our code, that we take the initiative and close it up. But I would remind people that in order to do that, we do have to have participation from the members on the left, because in the Senate, we do require bipartisan movement on any piece of legislation that comes to the Senate floor. So if they're not even willing to engage in a hearing, then it's unlikely that they're actually going to engage in code or law that will help us prevent fraud and recover those dollars for our American taxpayers. So thanks for not only exposing fraud today, but exposing that we don't have support from the left on preventing fraud and actually moving legislation that would solve the problem. So again, thank you all for being here today. Thanks to the chair for being willing to hold this hearing.
I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today to share their testimony and expertise with the committee. The record for this hearing will remain open until 5 p.m. on Friday, July 17th, 2026, for the submission of statements and questions for the record. The hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.
All right, guys, I was going to put on the hearing from the other night, but it's kind of late here, so I'm going to call it for the night. We will reconvene tomorrow, and thank you guys so much for joining me. I really appreciate all the participation in the chats. I hope you guys got something out of this stream and hearing. I think the bottom line is, the more we talk about what's going on, the better. And hopefully you guys feel better after I, told you what's been going on behind the scenes. Like I said, if you don't believe me, you can go on the DOJ website, read the press releases, search the videos out in YouTube. There's definitely justice that's being served. The problem is we just don't hear about it in the mainstream media. And I actually was shocked. Well, not shocked. Actually, I am shocked to hear that MSM has been calling Nick Shirley fraudulent for pointing out this fraud. I had no idea that that was going on. I don't watch those news channels. I had no idea. I mean, it's typical. It makes sense, but that's kind of alarming. But anyways, have a great night. I'll see everybody back here tomorrow. Thanks again for joining me.